Welcome back to the Latino Vote Podcast with your ever-present wonderful minds in the Latino community, Chuck Rocha and Mike Madrid. I'm Jason Villalba, the host, and we're bringing to you our show today from the NALEO conference in Chicago. So NALEO, for those who are uninitiated, is the National Association of Latino Elected Officials. It is a bipartisan group, but you often will see some leanings towards perhaps the other side, at least when I used to attend. I see that today, as per my request, Chuck wore one of his hats, but I'm disappointed to see that the Madrid tuxedo is not being utilized today. And so in exchange, I decided to put on my old monkey suit and look like a respected individual, even though both of you know that I am not, and talk to you today about some things. How you doing, fellas?
We're great.
Congressman, it's great to have you on. We have guests every so often, but usually they never come back because Chuck's so damn rude to them that they don't come back. So I'm glad he talked you into coming today, and we're excited that you're here and love to get your thoughts on a handful of issues. So, for our listeners out there, Congressman Gonzalez has been, it's not, is that what I'm saying? Cárdenas. Previously from the LA City Council and now revered member of the United States Congress since I think 2013. Am I right?
Yeah.
So important person for us to know, and thankful that you could take a few minutes to spend some time with us. And so tell us a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground at NALEO. What are the issues that are really resonating among the people that are there? Obviously today the big story is what happened at the Supreme Court. This is being recorded on the day that the Dobbs case has been issued by the Supreme Court. Roe v. Wade is no longer the law of the land, but having said that, I'd love to hear what people were talking about before that dropped.
Well, people are talking about, safety in our communities, especially when it comes to people being able to carry firearms. The Supreme Court just recently drastically expanded people's right to carry concealed weapons, which in my opinion is unconstitutional and obviously, to me, a step in the wrong direction. But if you just look at the facts are if there's a gun in the room, if there's a gun in the midst, somebody has a higher likelihood of getting hurt, and it's usually an innocent bystander. So people are talking about safety. People are talking about education. I've met a few of the educators around the country, especially those who've been elected to be on higher education. Big issue for the Latino community. When it comes to making sure that we can advance in this great country, education is a key. It's not the only thing, but it's a key. And so a lot of people talking about education and equality and access and things of that nature. And then also people are talking about other basic things like, the economy and quality of life. Most Latinos in this country are hard working folk, whether they go to work and put on a tie or they put on a pair of gloves. They're hard working folks. So, people are talking about bread and butter stuff. And to me, those are the issues that Americans across the board are talking about. Latino issues are American issues.
You and Mike probably have a really unique perspective, or you do have a unique perspective being from California and still having a very progressive state that's focused on Latino issues in a way that we probably just aren't in other parts of the country. As you've been reading in the news, and this is a debate that we have all the time on the show, the conventional wisdom seems to be that there's a movement to the right among Latinos. I don't think we're seeing that in California. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I want to get Mike involved in this conversation too, because I know he thinks a lot about these issues and he has some opinions on it. Are there differences between what you're seeing in California among Latinos and the rest of the country? And if so, why and what's driving that?
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, look, there are differences. And again, the congressman, I think I first became aware of him in 1996 cycle, 98 cycle when he was first elected.
Hey, Mike, if you can give us a little volume on your mic.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more.
A little bit more.
And get closer. And believe it or not, Mike, I want to hear your Republican voice. You're one of the Republican voices I enjoy hearing. Go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Congressman. You know, I've known of the congressman's career since I think 1996, 1998. Yep. I don't remember which year as I'm getting older. When a young realtor from the San Fernando Valley was elected to the state assembly, and you know, watching his career unfold over you know, involvement in the leadership in the state assembly and then the Los Angeles City Council, to see him now leading the Latino Hispanic caucus in Congress. You know, it's great at a personal level because I've been able to watch his career, but understanding, I think, some of the issues and the way that he approaches them, I think, is the best way to answer that question. So let me try that. Let me try and do that. As he just mentioned, we are a hardworking people. I think we all know that. We are largely come from blue collar, middle class communities. Many of us have the great fortune because of the work of our parents to then, you know, put on a tie and go to work, maybe be the first to attend college and attain educational opportunities. And that trajectory really, I think, over the course of the past couple of decades has been what really should be the guide, as simple as that is, focusing on those jobs in the economy, building an economy that works for a working class, and then ultimately having our children do better than we did. And there are stark differences in the way that is unfolding in different parts of the country. And I do believe that that is why we are seeing this very significant rightward shift in places like the Rio Grande Valley, in most places in Texas, incidentally, and as was pointed out in the 2020 elections, in every immigrant group. This is not just a Latino dynamic. It's more pronounced because we are a bigger and faster growing community, but it is happening in a way that I believe, my impressions are, that the Democratic Party has lost its way as the home of blue collar workers. And that's an important distinction. The distinction being, this is not because of anything that the Republicans are doing. The Republicans are winning despite themselves. I really firmly believe that. As somebody who's been involved in Republican politics and has watched the community for many years, if there was some silver bullet or something magic that they were doing, I would be the first one to say that's what's going on here. I just believe that as both parties reorient themselves, and we understand that the fastest growing segment of the Democratic Party is college educated professionals, and as Latinos make up the fastest growing segment of the non-college educated workforce, it stands to reason that you're going to see this move rightward. And you know, California is a little bit different. Our middle class faces two unique dynamics. One is extraordinary pressures on our middle class. We are creating jobs, most of them in the high-tech economy, which Latinos are vastly underrepresented in, and in service jobs, which Latinos are dramatically overrepresented in. And it's really hard to buy a home. It's really hard to make a living in a state where the cost of living in California is higher than anywhere else in the nation. And there has not been a focus on what I would suggest are middle-class jobs, where people who can work with their hands and make a living. Manufacturing jobs, we've been losing manufacturing. Construction jobs, we've got a hard time putting sticks in the ground to build houses in California. Transportation dollars are starting to open up nationally. So, you know, when I look at it nationally, the numbers make sense. This rightward shift is something I've been talking about for a very long time, but we are not seeing it in two states in particular. The first being California, the second is Arizona. And I'm sorry about the long diatribe, Congressman, but one of the quick things, I know you got time, your time is valuable and you need to go. The other thing that California and Arizona have in common is they have this extraordinarily long period of Republican anti-immigrant, anti-Hispanic sentiment, which is really cemented in anti-Republicanism for good reason in the minds and hearts of the Latino community. It's a little bit different than Texas. Texas has its own sordid past, but you have had since the mid-1990s up until really just 4 or 5 years ago, really aggressive anti-immigrant, anti-Hispanic sentiment from the Republican Party in California. Same thing in Arizona. Those are the things that I would subscribe this shift to, but I would love to hear the Congressman's thoughts on this.
I'd love to hear from Congressman, on this.
Sure. Mike, I would just modify one of the things that you just mentioned, that the Democratic Party has lost its way. There's only about 5 or 6 members of Congress who have ever uttered the words, defund the police. And there's over 220 of us. So looking at the Hispanic community, the Latino community, the Latino voter, we're a very respectful community. Despite what people think, Latinos disproportionately in America are more law-abiding than their multi-generation, more white neighbors, if you just look honestly at the statistics. Now, when you look at certain communities, certain zip codes, where you have a young brown man who's barely maybe 19 years old, he may have been pulled over 20 times while driving a car in his neighborhood, where that same 19-year-old Anglo-looking kid just 2 miles away in the white neighborhood may have only been pulled over once. So if you're going to pull somebody over 20 times and you're going to rifle through their car, you just might find something that you can pull them in and haul them in on. But if you only pull somebody who's the same age, has the same habits, is the same good young person getting pulled over once, then maybe you just send them off with a warning once. And then all of a sudden, people are saying statistically, well, that white kid is more honest than that brown kid. I just want to point that out. So for some of us, we're not saying defund the police, but I definitely say we need to make sure that police equally, that there's not inequality in the way we handle our laws and apply our laws on the streets of America. Those are the kinds of things that I believe that the Democratic Party believes in and wants to see happen. So there's a lot of nuances, and part of the root of your question at the beginning of this question was, well, you know, Republicans seem to be making inroads with Latino voters a little bit stronger lately than we've seen in the past. Yeah, that's the case. But you got to give the Republican apparatuses some credit, because they are communicating with Latino households more than Democratic apparatuses have chosen to speak to Latino households. So when you give somebody attention, and a lot of attention, and then they find some nuances where they agree with you, you're probably going to have them nod their head and say, hey, I might want to hang out with you. I'll give you a perfect example. There's a buddy of mine in high school. We were teasing him one day because he went to the prom with the prettiest girl on campus. I'm telling you, she was just, oh my God, just drop dead gorgeous, studious girl, etc. Straight-laced young lady. And our buddy Pete took her to the prom. So when we saw him, at lunchtime, we were teasing the heck out of him. But our point was this, and this is my point. How the heck did you get Delilah to go to the prom with you? This is the most important point that I think Mike will agree with me on. He said, I asked. All of us assumed that she had been asked 1,000 times, because every boy on campus would have loved to go to the prom with Delilah on their arm, but they just didn't go up to her and say, hey, you thinking about going to the prom? And this is what he said. We said, well, what do you mean you asked? He says, yeah, I'm in class with her, right? And I went up to her and said, hey, Delilah, are you going to the prom? And she says, no. And he's like, well, why not? Well, I don't have somebody to take me. So he gulped, had the guts to say, will you go with me? And she said, yeah, I'd love to. You get what I'm saying? So absolutely. The Democratic Party's biggest mistake right now, and I don't care who sees this, the biggest mistake that the Democratic Party is making in America is they are not talking to Latinos. Because when Republicans talk to Latinos, there's some things that Latinos would nod their head and say, I can agree with that. But I believe that if the Democratic apparatuses talk to Latinos, I think the Latinos are going to find that they have more in agreement with the Democratic Party than they do with the Republican Party.
Chuck, I want to hear from you on this one. You know, I've been reading your Twitter all week, and I've also been reading new Congressman Flores from Texas Twitter all week. She's begun the process of campaigning. She's begun to show that she is truly one of these rock-ribbed, sort of far-right Republicans in a region that's really not that. Is she a flash in the pan, given that kind of politics probably isn't going to resonate? And to speak to some of the ideas that we just heard, what can Democrats be doing to take that next step to engage in a more meaningful way, in a more effective way than they have historically?
Well, I think the congressman, and the reason I was laughing is because he's channeling Chuck Rocha on the Latino Vote Podcast, because all I say every week, Congressman, is me and Mike go back and forth because he thinks it's about messaging, and it is partly about messaging, but I keep pushing back on Mike for all these episodes saying half of it is just showing up. Half of it is just making the ask, and I keep going back to that's what I proved with Bernie Sanders, who's an old white guy with a Brooklyn accent from Vermont, who doesn't come to mind as some Latino savior in any way. And so showing up is a big part of it, making the ask. I love the story that I'm now going to steal from the congressman to talk about showing up and making the ask. But I think going to your point about Texas 34 and Mayra Flores is during that special election, right after when I was tweeting and everybody was going crazy that she'd won this special, I took all of her mail pieces, I scanned them, and I put them on Twitter to make a point is that from looking at her mail and the way she was communicating to voters, she wasn't using the right-wing, crazy MAGA monologues to talk to voters. If you looked at her mail pieces, she never really said Republican. She was talking about the American dream. She was talking about pulling yourself up from your bootstraps, which are all democratic values that the congressman was talking about. Now, what will really be interesting is what she does now in the next 6 months, because the district she has to run in November is 12 points more Democrat against a well-funded incumbent congressman, Vicente Gonzalez, who's represented the same media market now for 10 years. So it's a much different race. So it will be really interesting to me. She needs to be running to the middle, like her mail says, where she looks like, Mike Madrid says this all the time, Latinas in our households are really important pieces of the electorate and the thought process of voters. Latinas are the central piece of many families. So a woman running in a race against a man already gives her an advantage when they both have Latino surnames. So if she runs to the middle and does what her mail says she will do, which is espouse the American dream and things that are values of family and religion and work, to the congressman's point, anybody can win if the RNC puts $10 million behind her. But what she's doing and what she says towards the MAGA, QAnon, and all the things that she's now taken off of her Twitter will be really interesting to see which one of these paths she takes.
Although we did see this week that she issued a happy birthday tweet to Justice Clarence Thomas. I saw that you had made a point of that being a trigger for some folks, particularly after today's decision. I was surprised by that. If she is trying to tack to the center, singing praises of Clarence Thomas does not seem the way to beat Vicente down there. What am I missing something?
Well, you brought up Clarence Thomas, and the first thing I think of when I hear about Clarence Thomas's name, the U.S. Supreme Court Justice, and I mean this respectfully as possible, he's a person in America who benefited from affirmative action. But as soon as he became empowered, as soon as he got into college and out of college because of affirmative action, he speaks against affirmative action. And that's one of the disgusting things about human beings sometimes, is some human beings say, I got mine, close the door on the people behind me. And that's one of the values that I think the Democratic Party is consistent on, is we really have big arms, and we really want to make sure that we are door openers, not people who slam the door behind us once we got ours. And so it's really important to understand that, good for her to say happy birthday, Clarence Thomas. But at the same time, just looking at Clarence Thomas's statements today after the Roe v. Wade decision overturning, you look at what he's saying. What I hear him saying is saying, oh, we're not stopping there. We're coming after you, and we're coming after you, and we're coming after you. And this is what I want to say to everybody in America. Even if you're a straight, white, male, privileged in America, please believe me, you're going to see this Supreme Court get you upset when they decide to take on an issue that you never believed that they would, and that they're going to infringe on your liberties and your rights, because this Supreme Court is far, far, far too myopic in their conservativeness, and they're going to trample on the liberties and rights eventually of people who don't believe that they will. That's my warning today.
This is a nice segue into what I want to talk about with all three of you, particularly you, Congressman, because you're in the fire right now, and that is what happened today was nothing less than monumental, right? It was a seismic shift in the national law on this issue for 50 years. I mean, we saw precedent go down today, stare decisis, and this issue no longer exists. Immediately, Nancy Pelosi comes out, starts talking about how important this is, and I think we all recognize that it is. You're seeing marches already around the country, and it's going to get more, I think, tonight. Is this issue big enough to bring people who historically have not been as active voting to vote? And most importantly, will it bring the women vote out in a way that Democrats have not experienced it in the last couple of cycles? What do you think? And what's the feel among your brothers and sisters in Congress about the impact of something like this?
One thing I'd like to point out that is something that I think all of us on this discussion should be proud of is, as far as I can tell, I haven't seen any reports of violence. Okay, this is the United States of America, and this is a country where we can be above violence, even though we might vehemently disagree on something. So that's something that I'd like to point out. That's in that sense, that is something that I hope remains that way throughout these discussions, throughout these arguments, throughout these disagreements. Okay, and I mean that sincerely toward the people who made this decision and toward every single person walking around our great country, that nobody resorts to violence. And in addition to that, what I'd like to point out, it's great to see leaders speak up and speak their opinion and speak about their truths, and to try to remind people that we shouldn't lose hope. And that's what I heard in Nancy Pelosi's voice is, if you have hope for liberties for all in this country, if you have hope for equality for all in this country, pay attention to the decision that the Supreme Court made today, especially I think the person who spoke the most about it since then was the statements that we've read that Clarence Thomas put out. And that is that, oh no, we're just getting warmed up. We're just getting started. So, and another thing as well, I think it's important that today's an opportunity for men, not just women, but for men to think for 1 second. I have women in my life. I may have a wife, I may have a mom, a grandma, a daughter, a granddaughter. I need to think for a minute and say, what does this mean for other rights and liberties that women still don't have in this country? Are we going to go backwards? I'm not talking about a woman's right to choose. I'm not talking about abortion. I'm talking about other rights. You have entire boardrooms that don't have one woman in it. You have entire public entities that have appointed people to run universities and colleges where women are not represented. And so my point is this: when we step backwards in any way in our country and move away from treating people with equality, then we are endangering the future of our children and our grandchildren. In this case, more women than men, but trust me, what I heard Clarence Thomas say today after this decision that came out of the Supreme Court, I heard him say, we're just getting warmed up. And all I hear from that is, oh my God, we're gonna see decisions where we go backwards, and inequality, the gap is gonna get wider, and people being treated as equals in this country is gonna be harder for us to attain.
And my wife, when I told her this morning, when I was driving in, I heard the decision and at a stoplight texted her about it. I mean, we're Republicans, back old school Republicans, not current Republicans. And we're pro-life, but she said, we have 2 daughters. It was a kick in the stomach, and she wept, because it does mean that women aren't being treated equally in our country any longer. This is what this decision ultimately says, that the protections just aren't going to be there at the national level. I think that's painful. Mike had a really good tweet, I thought, today. And you talk about the women's vote, and this is the moment, right? Tell me about that tweet and what your thoughts were on that.
Look, as somebody who's been involved in Republican politics again for a long time, I will tell you there is not a single professional operative that I have worked for that thinks this is a good moment for the Republican Party. This is a disaster. The question is, how big is it going to be? And the answer to that question is really is those Republican women like your wife, suburban, couple of young kids, professional homes, voted Republican, maybe doesn't like the drift of the party, but isn't open to the Democratic Party yet. This is foundationally different. Roe versus Wade is gone. It's gone. Like, that's shocking. Again, and at least it is to me. Maybe it's not to the people in this discussion, but I never ever thought that was a real thing. Like, we talked about it hypothetical, and maybe it's because I'm a Californian and it's different than what Texas is going to be facing, but I just never imagined that it would actually come. And I'm a man, right? I'm a man. So as a woman, if this is maybe a secondary or tertiary issue, and today is a day where 50 years of precedent goes away, I have to think that it's going to create a political earthquake. I do believe it's going to have significant and serious ramifications on turnout in a way that will help, I think, the Democratic Party in two ways. First is those college-educated suburban women, which have been drifting towards the Democratic Party anyway. I think that this is why it's been drifting, and I think now that it's real, that will happen. The second is, if you look at all the polling data, the biggest challenge that the Democratic Party has faced in the past 18 months has been with 18 to 25-year-olds. Younger people are not engaged. This is real now. This is not hypothetical. This is not corporate Democrats, or this is, there's no difference between Republicans and Democrats. Like this shit's real. Excuse me, but this is now things just got real. And when they do get real, and usually they do as it gets closer to the election anyway, a lot of that shakiness that you have seen in the Democratic base is far more likely to consolidate than not. But when you have things that are this impactful, and keep in mind, just in the past 48 hours, American history was made too, with the evidence coming out of the January 6th committee. Like the stuff that we are seeing on a daily basis is so profound and so significant. I can't think of a year in American history like this, except for maybe 1968, right? The Age of Rage, where there's students being shot at Kent State, and then Martin Luther King, we lose him, and then Bobby Kennedy, and it's like all of these massive things are happening. And what happens in that environment? Turnout goes up massively because there's just this focus on it. We didn't even talking about gun control, which has obviously shocked the consciousness of the nation too. So I'm in the corner of believing that this is going to have very serious impacts. I think it dramatically moves women, Republican women, certainly independent women, towards the Democratic column, and I think it does goose turnout with 18 to 25-year-olds, which is a key constituency that the Democrats need.
I'd like to piggyback on something. I'm going to try to get Chuck to add on to, and I'll lead a question into him. Turnout, Mike, you hit the nail on the head. I think it was Martin Luther King and also Albert Einstein that both have a famous quote. I don't want to try to quote it because I would butcher it, both of them. But basically, the world is a bad and or dangerous place, not because of the bad people, but the good people who don't do anything about it. Turnout, Mike. If Americans respected and appreciated their authority, their responsibility, their privilege of voting, and actually voted, I think we would see very different results. I think we would definitely have not seen Donald Trump get elected. And the thing is, so I'm hoping that today, and what happened at Robb Elementary School, it's such a tragedy. My heart goes out to all of those families and to everybody across America, is this. People do have a right and a responsibility and a privilege, and that is to vote, regardless of the outcome. But I believe, for example, Donald Trump got elected not so much for the people who decided to vote, but probably more for the good people who saw this guy say things and do things and predict what he would do, right? Not everything he said was bad, but there was plenty there to be like, oh my God, who is this guy? And a lot of people said he can't get elected, right? But I think it was the people who didn't vote that contributed as much, if not more, to that ultimate outcome than the people who did vote. So my question to Chuck is, Chuck, how does whoever's interested in seeing higher turnouts, whoever's interested in having an outcome go their way, Republican, Democrat, or Democrat, an initiative or what have you, how should we go about it to make sure that more people vote?
We talk about this, and it's called expanding the universe. The problem that modern campaigns have, and let's think about it. Everybody who listens to this podcast is a nerd like all of us. But in an off-year election, again, off-year, the president is not on the ballot. A lot of people don't vote in years when the president is not on the ballot. So you have 60 to 70% of Americans who vote in a presidential year, but in an off year, a normal off year, it's hard to get it to 50, 55%. White people in an off year voted almost 60%, and in an on year, 72%. So they have a drop. Well, with Latinos, we were at 60% in a presidential year, and we dropped down in 1994, it dropped down to 45%. And then in 2014, it was up to 47. So you have this group of people, like my grandmother, to be honest. My grandmother only voted in presidential elections. A lot of folks only vote in those elections. So it starts with expanding the universe of what the congressman's talking about, explicitly going after the drop-off voters. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt who are those people that vote in every presidential elections, but normally don't show up in the off year. Let's start with that. That's your tier A. And then your tier B and C is there's a whole bunch of people, to the congressman's point, who don't show up at all or just every now and then. And then here's your real silver bullet for all of you pragmatic strategists out there. In every one of these congressional districts, like the congressman has, whether it's in LA or in South Florida, there's between 1,500 or 20,000 new registered, young, mainly multicultural Latinos who turn 18, who are new on the rolls that nobody talks to because they're not frequent voters yet, because they're new to the rolls. This is where your real growth potential is, to Mike's point, because this abortion issue, this gun issue are two issues that Generation Z really cares about. These young people, this is something motivated them. There's abortion and guns number one on a working class Latino family living in LA. No, it's jobs, economy, feed my family, gas and groceries. We know that. But these young kids who are 19, who are seeing Columbine, who are seeing Uvalde, they see themselves in these young activists. This is a way to expand the universe and start talking to newly registered voters to get them engaged because they really care about these two issues.
I want to close with the congressman. I think we've had a good conversation around the two big issues of the week. But at NALEO, I'm certain that there are other issues that are bubbling to the surface. There are action items. There are discussions. What's the feel? What are people saying about the state of the union among Latinos? Right? I mean, is there hope? Is there fear? Is there trepidation? Is there anger? Is there all of the above? What's the feel there?
The feel and the thing that, and with all due respect, you're talking about NALEO. It's a national organization of Latino elected and appointed officials. So we're probably reading things and documents and information and dialoguing with folks differently than the average Latino out there in America, and rightfully so, because that's our job, right? We got elected to know more, to do more, to be more informed, et cetera, and then hopefully make good decisions. But that having been said, the feel that I get and the conversations that I've had with the handful of people that I got in yesterday, and I was talking to folks and running into people in the hallway, in the elevator, and had some dinner with a few others, et cetera, is this. The positive is our people are doing better because more of our people are working and more of our people are able to get paid more because of the job situation, right? All across America, I don't care if it's rural America or big city America, people are saying, I'm having a hard time filling my slots, right? That means that they're now offering a bit more for that dishwasher than maybe they would have offered 2 years ago, right? So that guy may have been washing dishes 2 years ago, but now he or she's washing dishes today, and they got a little bit more money in their pocket to take home. And then on the flip side of that, the negative is gas prices. Gas prices are exorbitantly high. With all due respect, it's a manipulation of the market. I'm sorry, whether it's the Saudis or whether it's people conveniently saying, well, we closed a couple of plants down. Yucks! Oh my gosh! Sorry, we did that. So the supply is a bit tighter. And what do they do in supply and demand? Just look at the record profits of the oil companies in America. American corporations who are now watching Americans have to pay $5.5, $6.5 a gallon. And it's probably going to go up even more during the summer because demand goes higher. But the bottom line is there's a correlation here. People are paying more. We need to figure out what can be done about that. But at the same time, I'm here to disappoint everybody with this simple fact. Gas prices, the oil industry, completely 100% unregulated. That means laissez-faire, people. Capitalists run it, and capitalists decide what the price is going to be at the pump. It ain't the president. It's not even the United States Supreme Court, as much as I'm upset with them today. No, they got nothing to do with that. It simply is simply this. We live in a capitalist system, and too many people in America are having a hard time paying for groceries after they have to put gas in their car because they got to get to work. They got to take their kids to school.
And Jason, if I could jump in, I think it's important that being here at NALEO, and me and Mike just came off the stage where we talked about don't leave the Latino votes on the table. You know, we were honored to be the keynote speaker. And I think before the congressman goes, it's important that we hit on one last topic as a point of personal privilege for me, because we talk about this so much on this podcast. And everybody knows that I'm constantly hammering Brown Consultants Matter. Mike's constantly talking about cultural competency. We're also talking about a new term we use now, cultural humility, when we show up into a community to make sure that we understand that community. And, you know, the congressman, it's easy to go to Washington. It's easy to go to Washington and be this leader and then close all the doors behind you and have a 40-year career and not do bad. Well, you know, not just because the congressman's sitting here, because the congressman is like my brother. He picks on me and gives me shit all the time. But from the moment I got to DC, he was advocating for more diversity with Capitol staff, with congressmen, with chiefs of staff, with junior staff, with interns, and the only person I've ever dealt with up there that really leaned into the business section of our Democratic work and Republican work, to be honest, Mike, because we talk about this here, unlike other people, the underbelly of politics, the people who actually run the campaigns, the people who actually make the money. And while a lot of times Democrats, when I talk about it, show up wrong, Mike Madrid talks about Republicans showing up wrong, Tony Cárdenas shows up and demands representation with the power that he has. And at NALEO, with a whole room full of Latino elected officials, it was very important for me to get Tony here to talk to us because he has been a champion for our community on diversity, inclusion, and most importantly, equality.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for your time today. Why don't you give the listeners your Twitter handle and, if you're comfortable, your email so we can start to follow you more regularly and reach out to you and just say
and
hello.
Your phone and no.
Well, I have several, so I'll have somebody on my team to give Chuck the one that actually would probably be most fun for the people who listen to your podcast here. So I'll get that over to Chuck, and then he'll put it on the screen one of these days or what have you, because I have several, and I don't want to accidentally give an official one because this is probably more in line for the unofficial Twitter handle than the official one.
I normally just give my cell phone out so that all his Twitter followers can follow his.
You're that guy.
Chuck's
that guy.
Because for the record, Mike Madrid, in 1968 was the year I was born. We all know you were 22 in 1968, Madrid.
Well, we're not going to dox anybody today, but thank you for your time. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on the Latino Vote Podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time on episode 10. We've done 9 episodes in the can. This was a special one because we had the congressman with us. We'll finish with some flourish, I guess, next couple of weeks with something fun. Great to see you again, and join us next time on Latino Vote Podcast.
Gracias. Thank you. Take care.